They want to be seen as a dominant force, not necessarily the dominant force. Given the sort of a pullback of American position and a complete change in the Russian tradition and Japan's sort of more moderate position now, China sees itself as deserving to be taken seriously as a world power.
If China becomes an hegemonic power, what would be the flavor, what would be the cultural imperialist China?
It's fascinating. I mean, partly it might be linguistic, which the Chinese are encouraging other countries for students to learn Chinese. So for me, coming from Europe to America, the change is very significant in terms of linguistic a willingness to learn other languages, not just European languages. And China is very strong on projecting its own history. It wants us to believe that China's geographical extent has always been roughly what it is now. And as a historian, one has to say that is not really true. China is very different shape now than 400 years ago, 600 years ago, 800 years ago. But it's been a dominant force in that general area for at least 3 millennia. So it has a long historical record to look back at. In a broader sense of culture, China is rediscovering its own classical texts, restudying them, rethinking their message. China is a real force in archaeology globally and is making some extraordinary discoveries of new kinds of texts written on bamboo, for instance, and different kinds of textiles. China would like to be seen as an old and revered culture. And some of this might be, we could call it simplified Confucianism perhaps, but other is maybe more straightforward nationalism. It is, they want the world to know that they are one of the major early civilizations, a distinction which they feel they share with certain Middle Eastern nations.
The Chinese, of course, see themselves, they try to show that they would be a benign power.
Well, they want to project themselves as a benign.
They want to create that.
Yes. If we look at how Chinese culturalism and financial power might go, you know, then one can also look at Taiwan and Hong Kong as providing kind of short-term models for China's development, trying to see what is attractive to foreigners, and China as a tourist site has great potential, despite the amount that, ironically, that was destroyed during the Cultural Revolution. But China is now rebuilding its tourist industry, just as it is trying to restore some of its cities from what has been an absolutely ruthless kind of redevelopment plan in China, which has destroyed many urban communities totally, even as it's tried to rebuild them on a more modern model. So China would like to be seen as kind of looking backwards with seriousness to its own past, but also able to draw from the past examples of China's creative energy, cultural energy, and also political sophistication. And so hence the fascination with early politics and Chinese history in China, which is very deep and very real.
It must be ironic for an historian that in the 60th anniversary of the Mao victory,
yes,
when China was this big threat to capitalism, now it's being looked at as the savior of capitalism.
It's very strange, and it could not have been calculated. In the year 2009, what is the long-range importance of 1949 in China? Can one, in fact, in a way, now teach Chinese history in something of a new way, which sees Maoism as a partial distraction from a more logical Chinese pattern of development and growth, which was a pattern developed in the 1920s and 30s as China tried to modernize and build its economy and get a more sophisticated bureaucracy and a stronger government. All these things were underway in the 1920s and 30s, and they got completely disrupted by the Japanese invasion and China's own radical politics. And so the victory of Maoism in the Civil War of 1949 seemed to be, when I started teaching or doing research, just the way you define China. China was extreme leftist nation with a very, very strong centrally controlled bureaucracy and very, very limited freedoms for its own people. Now there seems to be a very, very different, and there is genuinely, I think, a very different feeling in China, but political control remains extremely strong. But is it the strength of the early Communist Party organization, or is it more the strength of the old Nationalist Party, what we call the Kuomintang, the National People's Party, which technically is still the majority party in Taiwan?
A China anda rapidamente, mas tem um longo caminho pela frente para levar o desenvolvimento visto aqui em Pequim para toda a população. 60% ainda vivem no campo. Enquanto durar o processo de urbanização, o crescimento não deve parar. E com ele, um certo impulso na economia mundial. A China pode não ultrapassar os Estados Unidos a curto prazo, mas avança para chegar perto e rivalizar com os americanos no domínio da economia mundial.